Okay, hello everyone. I'm Dana Carey, and I'm part of the admin team for our Facebook group. And today we're going to be talking about chapter 4, which is has to do with how we have the furniture in the classroom, which is mainly about defronting our classroom. So got the recording going, and looks like we have about 23 in our room right now. If you want to put in the chat, maybe what grade level you teach, anything like that might help with some of our conversation and help us connect with others who teach the same grade level. I'm from Indiana and Southwestern Indiana. I am not an expert on building thinking classrooms. I did start implementing it in August, and I did all of the pieces except assessment, but I'm not perfect at it. So hopefully we can have some good conversation from those others who have used it. And of course, we'll take questions from anyone who has questions. Okay, so let's jump right in. We've got about 35 minutes because I have the free version of Zoom. So it only gives us about 40 minutes for our session. Is there anyone who'd like to get us started? Maybe anything from the chapter that stood out to you, or concern you might have with trying to defront your classroom? Anything at all? Anyone want to get us started? Feel free to jump in. We're very informal.
My concern is essentially sharing the classroom. I know they mention it in the book, but just getting the students to move the desk and then move on the back. So I was just curious if anyone is sharing a room and then is reorganizing the furniture and then having to put it back.
I will be sharing rooms I'm going to be part-time, so I'll have 4 classes, and probably all 4 classes will be in different rooms. I haven't figured out how I'm going to manage that yet. So, and we don't have desks, we have tables. So some of our rooms are actually kind of already defronted, but not all of them. Just kind of depends on the teacher. So I haven't quite figured out, Anna, how I'm going to do that either yet. So thank you for asking that question. But because I don't know that we can move tables, like the big tables and stuff. I don't know, but we'll see. And I don't know what the teachers will let me do.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was in 3 different rooms, so I can identify.
I'm in 7 different rooms. I haven't done BTC yet, but I do defront my classroom. I'm in different rooms all the time, even with the same group. When it's the first period of the day, I get there early and I set the tables up or desks up the way I want them. I have desks, I have big, huge lab tables that are a pain to move, but I just do it. And then I just leave them because I don't know what the next teacher is going to want. So I lose a few minutes at the beginning of class if I'm not teaching first period or first after lunch, but I don't lose any time at the end of class.
Does anyone else? Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's also about where you position yourself, because we talked at one of the meetings prior about how it's good also to have students where they have their home base and they know that that's their space. And so I think it's also about, because I only have I have one wall with whiteboards on them. And so my thought is, well, I don't have to teach or start the lesson or start the thinking task at that whiteboard all the time. I can move myself around the room so that I'm defronting it without having to actually change the environment.
Does anyone else have experience with having to share the room? Because that came up in one of our other meetings. about having to, David, and I think you were one who talked about that. I
Yeah.
fortunately don't have to do that, so I'm not sure what I would do. I like David's idea though, that, you do it at the start of the class and then just leave it. It probably aggravates the person coming in behind, but we all do what we have to do. I think the challenge, if it were me, would be more so the putting it back and not the initial, putting it, having the kids move to get to their groups, but having them move it back, making that effort to watch the clock to make sure I had time to do that, I think would probably be the challenge for me, because time gets away from me pretty easily.
I feel like, can you all hear me? Okay, I feel like I love David's idea of leaving it alone. Now, I have my own room this year, but I have worked as a traveling teacher. And hopefully I won't ever go back to that. Not a fan, but I think that works great if you communicate up front to the teacher whose room you're in. If it's their room, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And I know it's going to be a
Mary, I lost you. Did anyone else lose her?
Yeah, the sound cut out.
Mary, we lost you. Oh, sorry.
So I do share my room, but if only for one period. So basically it's my room and they're coming into it. So I think that's just a discussion I'm going to have with whoever gets my room on my prep.
Yeah, I think if you sometimes talk to the other teachers that you're sharing the room with, some of them don't even care anything. They're just like, well, I'm in here just once as well or something. And so they just might not even mind. I made that mistake too, waiting too long in the year to even talk to the other teachers. And then I was like, oh, they don't really care what I do. And they'll just move them themselves back. Like that's kind of because they recognize, well, I have to move them to begin with. So they'll also just go ahead and move them to begin with. As I share rooms too, but I haven't started the BTC thing. So my challenge is I've got the long, skinny rectangular tables that fit 2 students and trying to think about how to make that work for 3 moving forward.
Most of our classrooms, that's what we have, are the skinnier tables that would fit 2 kids on one side. But a lot of the teachers have put 2 together. So then they have 4 or sometimes even 5 or 6. So I figured I would probably end up having, in some cases, just depending on the room and the size of the class, 2 groups at a table, because it'll be 2 tables together. I don't know if that helps with that. If you can put tables together.
Someone mentioned in the chat about, it was Beth, about seating charts. I shared in one of the other sessions that I teach 8th grade, and my room really isn't big enough to do groups of 3 desks and still have sufficient room at the whiteboards. And so I moved mine into groups of 6 desks, and we could get around the room a lot easier, had a lot more space at the boards. But I don't put my kids in groups when they come into the room. They have an assigned seat. That just works for me. Last year, when I implemented this, I knew I was going to be out a lot because I had some personal things going on. And, when you have a sub, you've got to have the assigned seats. And so they had their assigned seat. They came in, they got settled. We talked about what was going on for the day. I made the groups and they went to the boards, and that worked for me. Of course, you have to do what works for you. But it seemed like there were some other people in the group who said that they did something similar and it worked for them also. You just have to remember, it's a framework, and mold the building thinking classroom into what works for your environment. And I needed the seating charts, and it worked for me. And one of the things that was kind of nice about it too, is I noticed that when they would go back to their seats, they could have like a little different conversation with their group at their seat, because it wasn't the same group at the board. And so they could kind of extend that conversation a little bit, or, or maybe talk about parts they still didn't understand, and maybe someone at their seat understood it. So for me, it worked okay. Does anyone else have any experience with having a seating chart or not having a seating chart, how that worked for you?
I do that as well. That I'm in third grade and I have assigned, they're sitting in assigned seats, but they go with the group that changes every day is the group that's up at the board. And then when they go back to their seats, they're with, so they're not sitting next to kids that they don't get along with and things like that all day. The changing group, the group that changes every day that can be completely random is the group they're standing with at the boards. But then when they go back to their seats, they're with a group that I have assigned. And it seems to work okay.
So how do you handle seating for required assessments? So what I did is, we do iLearn in Indiana. I just moved the desks into rows for that time period. And so I think it was the week before, like later in that week, I moved them into rows so they weren't entirely surprised. And then I just left them that way during the testing period, which was 2 weeks. Of course, I was eager to move them back. I was tired of it very quickly. But you're going to have, I feel anyway, that you're going to have situations like that where you have to go back to what works for that event. And so for me, I couldn't have my kids in groups. I think that also kind of goes along with the experiences we've had with COVID. When I started the school year, I couldn't do groups. And so to defront, what I did was I had one section facing sets of desks facing one wall and another section of desks facing a different wall. And so they weren't all facing the same way. And that worked okay. Because, we're teachers, we do what we got to do to try to make it work. And another thing I did, which someone else pointed out, is I stood at different places of the room. We all have that projector or overhead that seems to designate this is the front of the room. And so I would purposely stand at different places of the room when I was giving instruction or having conversation for whatever reason. If I needed to write on the board, I would write at different places of the room. I'm fortunate that I've got a good amount of whiteboards. And so I would start at different places around the room to help facilitate that. Just that, because that's where the overhead is, doesn't mean that's necessarily the front of the room. That was really awkward for me because I was so used to being at the front of the room that to stand somewhere else, I had to purposely do that. But I think it went okay. Anyone have any comments about how that worked for you? Trying to follow the chat while we're doing this. So you guys
maybe I can just verbally ask my question I put in there, because I don't know if it
sure
depends. But when you were talking about if you do have, I'm new to trying the different room setups and everything with BTC, but so if you have different groups at the desk versus at the boards, what is the timing like in switching from, like I mentioned, like the consolidation notes to the check your understanding practice? So like, how do you have that when people have moved, like if they're not standing at their boards anymore, trying to to know where thoughts are coming from, which groups. Does that make sense? Or-
I think I'm following you. So when you're ready to consolidate, and I'll be honest, I'm not the best at that part. That's one of the things I'm going to be working on this year. You do the consolidation while they're still standing. And so you haven't moved back to the desk yet. And they just walk from space to space wherever you're going to talk about at the boards. And then they go back to their seat and work on their notes or their check your understanding, which again, I thought worked out pretty well with them having a different group then to talk about with the notes and if it was check your understanding. So they kind of would get a different perspective and maybe, be able to help someone or pick up a part that they didn't with their first group. So for me, I think it worked okay. Does anyone else have an experience with that?
I usually did the consolidation standing, but sometimes when the groups were really kind of off, when we were starting something new and their ideas were, there were a lot of mistakes on the boards. Sometimes I had them sit down because then it was kind of anonymous, and they weren't, you could kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, point out mistakes, and they weren't standing right next to their mistakes, or not point out mistakes, but when they didn't seem so. It was a little less embarrassing to them, I think, to not be standing right next to their things that were wrong. It was kind of more anonymous if they're sitting down. If they're sitting down, they seem, I don't know. Sometimes it worked out better. Usually I did it while they were standing next to their boards, but sometimes I did it while they were sitting down. To kind of I tried it both ways. And sometimes if they were complaining about standing up, I had them sit down.
I think it also depends on your class because you may do it different with different classes. You got to know your audience. Sorry. My phone on because I got my timer set, so I make sure we don't run over. Any other thoughts? Anyone else tried it and what worked, what didn't work? I honestly thought of everything that has to do with building thinking classrooms, that defronting was the easiest part for me. So I was kind of glad about that. I was like, oh, hey, I can do that I'm not worried about. Some of the other pieces still feel a little bit intimidating because it's just not been my nature to deliver instruction that way or just any of it. And so I was happy when this chapter came along because it gave me a little bit of confidence in that, oh yeah, I can do that part. That'll be all right.
Yeah, I'd have to say in my observations, that was one of the things that was commented on is that, I was really using the entire classroom that, I was in different parts of the classroom, but once again, because I was sharing 3 different rooms, the whiteboard, the smart board and the teacher's desk are really always situated at the front. But I tried to make it so that I was moving at least.
I never really had a desk. Always used a smart board for some things, mainly things that I want them to be able to see. But our curriculum really aligned with building thinking classrooms. The only difference was that they stood up and did it instead of sitting down in their workbooks, which just made it so much more engaging. Once I threw those books away and gave them the exact same things standing up, it was game changer.
I was rereading this chapter this morning because it's pretty short. And one of the things that stood out to me is how the student feels when they come into your room and the impressions they get immediately based on the arrangement of the desks and, you know, how organized is it or how unorganized is it? And not that I'm super organized, because I tend to have my happy mess on my desk where, you know, I've got papers kind of scattered for the day and trying to, you know, get it all figured out. But I just had never thought about it. And, you know, until I read this chapter last year about when they see those desks in ordered rows, and it immediately, you know, gives them that feeling of, you know, I'm going to have to sit in my seat and pay attention. And, you know, not that they don't, you know what I mean? That, you know, it just gives them that mindset of, oh, she's going to be delivering instruction and I'm going to have to sit here and take notes. And so I thought that was interesting, because I'd never thought about it that way. I mean, I think as teachers, we try to make our classrooms inviting, you know, I mean, that's just in our nature. But I just hadn't thought about the desk situation not being inviting. So I don't know.
I think that goes back to my sharing the room, because one of the teachers I shared a room with was very organized and, you know, really wanted the desks in a perfect row. And so if they were not perfect when she came back in the room, you know, it really kind of upset her. But it does, you know, it really does convey a message, you know, what, you know, how the furniture is arranged. Because I know, you know, in some of the classes I observed, they would have table grouping versus the rows. You know, the high school I'm at is very, I would say, very traditional. And so most of the classrooms are set up with rows.
Well, and we all know when you come back in from summer break, how do they have our desks arranged? In rows, right? I mean,
Stacked in the
they clean our rooms and put the desks back in rows. And I told our custodians, because I said, when you move, because they move ours from one side to the other to clean the carpets, I said, just leave them all there. Don't worry about moving them, because I'm going to move them anyway. So just leave them all in a bunch. It's okay. But they're doing their job, and that's, you know, that's what they're supposed to do. And, but, you know, that's just what you think of when you think of the schools, nice desks in nice, neat rows.
Well, that's what we always had growing up. That's what I went to school with. So yeah, but it makes total sense that expectation of I can't make a mistake because everything's perfectly. So I have a question, if it's okay, about the whiteboards. Because again, sharing classrooms, some classrooms have more whiteboard space than others. I'm still trying to figure out how I might bring some with me easily between classes. But we do have, a lot of classrooms have big windows, and I know with the dry erase you can use windows and stuff, but our window sills are like a foot deep and kids sit in them all the time. I'm just concerned, is that going to be like, if they end up kind of like leaning on there, sitting like they're not technically standing, is that going to be a big issue? I don't know if that is that positive. Am I overthinking that, or I don't know? Just wondered what your thoughts on that would be.
I think you have to work with what you have. And so, you know, using the window, because I observed a classroom that used their windows, but they didn't have the big windowsill, like you said. So I think students will, you know, kind of say, oh, why are they getting to lean? You know, that's just the way the class runs.
You will have an issue with the leaning, and I think you just have to set that expectation and be firm about it. But honestly, I mean, I have kids who literally like lean against the wall because they're like dying, you know, and so it's going to happen whether they have that little bit of space where they can actually sit or lean, or they have, you know, this much of a tray at the whiteboard and they're literally like leaning on it or leaning on the wall, and just you know, it's the end of the world because they have to stand for 20 or 30 minutes. So it's going to happen regardless where you put them. They're going to want to lean, they're going to want to sit on the floor. If there's a desk or a chair nearby, they're going to still sit. And it's just setting that expectation, and I had to constantly redirect. No, we're not sitting. Get up, get up. And I said, if I can stand all day, you can stand for 20 minutes. So get yourself up. Of course, you do have situations, you know, where kids are injured or whatever, but you know, that wasn't ever a big deal for me. So any other thoughts on that? Because that's a really valid point.
I was just going to say that it's too, what is the message that you're trying to send? It's kind of like we're trying to get them out of rows. We're trying to get them out of that traditional mindset. So if they're leaning against the wall, you know, they're still up, and as long as they're interacting with their group mates, it's kind of one of those things. I'm moving rooms this year, and one of my walls has these like bookshelves that are like waist high in front of them. So my kids are going to have to reach over those, but it's one of those things. It's like, is that something that's going to affect their interactions with each other, as far as, you know, the learning tasks, the thinking tasks, those kind of things? Or is it one of those things that it's like, okay, no, you got, you know, it's just a matter of your perspective in your classroom, I think, is my opinion, in terms of, you know, is what I want from them, which is them thinking and understanding the math, is that what is going on? And if it is, the rest of it I can live with.
I have a question about, so I do have a smart board, and I guess I use that as a very central location for information. So I'm just wondering, like, how teachers that have, you know, done this already, is there any need having a place in the room where there's like some permanent or information that stays up visually, or like, do you move that around, or what do you do with that idea?
I'm a smart board baby. I started using smart board in like 2001, so I'm showing my age here. But and I was very adamant about using Smartboard and not using anything else and everything. And then when we went into COVID, I had an issue of my kids couldn't see the Smartboard. So I had to come up with an alternative plan. So I started using Jamboard, which I liked because it could be on if you're a one-to-one school, it can be on every, you know, computer at the time if you need something that's up and it stays up, or even if it's just a timer or whatever that you put into Jamboard. But it also was great because it gave the kids a chance to actually interact, because they can post sticky notes. They can do tons of things on Jamboard, you know, that you can't with the one central Smartboard. Because trust me, I was that sage on the stage at the Smartboard, you know. So Jamboard was a big step for me, but in the end, I think it helped the kids, just because it's viewable. Sometimes if they're working on their boards, I'll have like a question, one of their thinking tasks on the Jamboard, or I'll have it on a Google form, and, you know, until they get the correct answer, they can't move on to the next question. I set up the Google form so that they can't move on. But to me, good luck. I hope, hopefully maybe Jamboard, try it. Maybe it'll help you, because I understand that unsureness of going from a Smartboard to something else.
Yeah, thank you.
We certainly get comfortable with our technology. My counterpart, who also does the building thinking classrooms, she has a section of her whiteboard where she'll put things you need to know today. So it would be prior knowledge concepts that are helpful for today's concept. And so she puts that on a section of her board every day. I don't know if that kind of goes along with what you're talking about. And that seems to work really well for her. And she'll, Peter says 5 minutes and then put them to the boards, and she'll take just a couple of minutes to say, okay, guys, for today's concept, this is what you got to know. This is what we've already done that applies to today. And she leaves it up there. So I don't know if that works for anyone else. But that's just another idea. Any other questions? We've got a couple more minutes. Any questions at all?
Dana, you mentioned how you have like a home group, the base group where they come in for their assigned seats at the beginning. And I love that. And I think my squirrely freshman would definitely need that. How often do you change those? Do they tend to get a little, well, one, how often do you change them? But also two, do they get a little bit complacent in those groups? Like after they've gone to the board and they sit back down, do they tend to, my worry is they're going to think they can be invisible again, you know, because now they're in this routine of these same kids at these seats every day.
I think with any assigned seats, you kind of have to change them up from time to time. And then sometimes I'll just switch some seats because you put kids in assigned seats and you see, oh, that's not working out, that group right there. And so you just switch a few seats. So it kind of just depends on the dynamics of the class. I think another part of that is when I put them back in their seats, they usually don't have a whole lot of time. So if it's a matter of doing notes or doing a check your understanding, the kids who want to hurry and get it done so they don't have homework, get on it. And then you have kids who don't, because that's part of the process. So I'm not sure how well I'm answering your question, but I don't give them a lot of time to do the notes or the check your understanding. So I think kind of that helps with the being off task, and sometimes, I mean, I do still go around and say, hey, are you going to do the notes? Or are you going to do the check your understanding? Because technically in the world of building thinking classrooms, we don't require them to do those things. So I try to still give them that nudge. But a lot of kids will, hey, I've got, 7 minutes. I can get this done in 7 minutes, and they'll crank it out. So does that help, Melissa?
Yes. Yeah, that's helpful. I think hearing where you saying that, creating that sense of urgency to get to it would really help. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Any questions at all?
If they're already in their seats, how quickly can you, how do you put them in their groups?
What I did last year is I had little picture cards that I had initially made to help me learn names of my students before school started. I got that idea from Pam Harris. I don't know if any of you follow her also. I tried the Flippity, and it's a great tool, but for some reason, I don't know if I just wasn't using it right. It didn't work for me. And so I started using my picture cards. And so they would come in, get seated, and I'd have my cards out, and I took my attendance that way. I pulled out the kids who weren't there, and I would stand there and shuffle my cards. They would see me shuffling them, and we'd talk about what we had going on that day. And then I'd pull 3 and lay them down and say, okay, these 3, you're at board 1, pull the next 3. And so then I'd have them all laid out. I'd take a picture, because at that time we were still contact tracing. And it really didn't take long at all. It was pretty quick. So, and plus then I had it right there. I could say, I think you're in the wrong group. Because they will try to switch it up on you every once in a while. Mine weren't too bad about it. But they also knew I had the evidence of that, no, this is not the group you were supposed to be in. So
So you're saying the cards are actually pictures of the students with
Mhm.
their name? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we do Power School. And so in Power School, there's usually, I mean, I had a few that didn't have a picture. There's the picture of the student, and it took me a while to build that. I did it on a Google Slides and then printed it and had it laminated and cut and everything. And I'm going to do it again this year. That worked for me very well. So. There's a question in the chat. We have just maybe a minute on the recorder. I don't know if we'll get kicked out or not. Never gone over time. Are there any elementary teachers who do the random seating? Peter talks about it in the book, and he suggests that elementary teachers may have to find a secondary place for students to keep their supplies so that they can do the random seating. So are there any elementary teachers who do that?
So part of my question is that do elementary teachers also bleed the random sets of groups of people into other content areas? Right?
Gotcha.
I just started with BCT in January after Christmas, and I only did it in math so far, but be good enough, probably good in other subjects, but I didn't do it yet.
I don't know why you couldn't do it with other subjects.
This is Carrie. I teach 5th grade, and I random group my kids for all subjects. So I do flippity, or I have cards, and every subject when they get in groups. Very rarely do they get in their table groups, which is their seating arrangement, but I have done that too. But I'm self-contained, and almost every subject, when we switch subjects, they know they're going to switch groups. So they're not stuck with the same people. And sometimes they work with people they love, and sometimes they work with people they don't like. And we're learning how to work that way, because that's life. We're always working with someone we love, and sometimes we work with people we don't like, but to problem solve every single thing I throw at them. So it works really nicely. It takes maybe 2 minutes after you get it started. At the beginning of the year, it's a little bit longer, but as soon as they know they're going to go in a different group, it's maybe 2 minutes for them to get up and move. And they keep their stuff in their desk. They just move the stuff they need. So I don't have a separate seating area, supply area. Everything they need is in their desk. They bring their pencil box and the subject they need to wherever they're going. So it makes it very nice. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. We're right about at time. I appreciate everybody coming. I don't know if we'll be doing a chapter 5 study, but I'll let you know as soon as I know. They're trying to put together some other concept studies through the poll that we started a couple weeks ago. But just keep checking the page and we'll let you know what's going on. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great day.